Yakuza 0 Director's Cut is a brand new game in every conceivable way, except for the fact that it isn't, because it's just Yakuza 0 again. It came out a couple of months ago now and is exclusive to the Nintendo Switch 2, although I'm unsure as to how long that statement will be accurate because it might come to other platforms one day. But it's also something basically no one properly talked about beyond a couple things, and then like a week passed and no one mentioned it ever again. So for this video, my job is to talk about it. And now it's a long story, but I haven't properly had Yakuza 0 music on my channel since January of 2024, and I reckon this game's the perfect excuse to change that. So I'll kick off this video with easily the best song from the Yakuza 0 disco minigame. We all know it. We all love it. It's our favourite time of the week because of course it's the one, the only. Now unfortunately this video is going to overall be a bit negative, which I don't want it to be, but it just will. So I may as well start off with everything positive in relation to the director's cut. Starting with something I've mentioned a handful of times on my channel already, and something that understandably wasn't like a selling point in the trailers or on the back of the box, but this is something I am still kinda surprised Sega never mentioned. In the original Yakuza 0, you could only save at the save points throughout the maps. For the most part, there was nothing wrong with this, but as with any game with save points, there's bound to be moments where it becomes a bit of a chore or annoyance to go all the way over to a spot just to save. Even if you're someone who never bothers manually saving and just relies on autosave, which I know a lot of people that are like that for some reason, you couldn't even do that because the game didn't have an autosave. But now you can save anywhere you want outside of combat and select story areas, and the game has a very good autosave. I've seen some foolish people who insist that that kills the difficulty of the game, and I laugh because there is no difficulty involved in me wanting to go make dinner or something and I've just finished a round of the cabaret minigame and have to walk over to this room and then save. Because now you can just do it right here, or you can do it in front of the table with the real estate minigame. Or maybe if the game's like, hey, are you sure you want to go to the next segment? You can just save right there just in case. It doesn't make the game easier, it just makes my life easier. It's a huge quality of life improvement over the original that alone massively improves the whole quality of the game, despite just being a small little thing, but don't expect everything else to be like that. Then there are two little things that are connected, but if you played the game with English text and Japanese audio, are completely irrelevant. The first thing is that the game now has additional text localizations in these languages, and the game allows you to pick any of them regardless of which version you have, including the original Japanese, Chinese, and Korean ones, if you want to, for whatever reason. I don't know which language version these new ones would have been based off of, you know, whether it was the English text they adapted or the Japanese one, or if they're accurate and understandable and whatever. I just know that they exist. And it's a good thing that they do because it of course allows more people to be able to play the game in a language that they might understand easier. The other thing they did was add in two new audio languages of the game in the form of an English and Chinese dub. English dubs are something they've made a standard for new games since 2018's Judgment, and since last year's Infinite Wealth, this is now the third Chinese dub. Both of these things serve the same purpose as the text languages, that is, to allow more people to have an easier time understanding things, but of course when it comes to acting and performances, it becomes more about subjective enjoyment. Now there are many reasons to prefer one dub over another. It might be that you prefer the actors in one version over the other, or maybe you understand the language more and it's easier for you to consume. And of course on the subjective side of things, Yakuza 0's only ever been in Japanese since it released in Japan 10 years ago, so understandably it's hard to hear different voices come out of characters for those of us who have already played it, but for people who haven't, well, the casting is actually really good. Now, I still haven't listened to the Chinese dub of 0, but I assume it's like the previous two where it does everything it needs to do. But just like the English dubs in all the other games, it's really hard to get English actors that can match the same energy as the Japanese actors, considering a majority of the time, the characters were made to be played by specific actors. But with this game's English dub, they managed to find a lot of actors who sound very much like their Japanese counterparts. Not saying that sounding like them is actually the important thing, because it's instead finding a voice and shaping that voice in a way that matches the character, which fortunately they've also managed to do very well. Even Yong Ye, who in Infinite Wealth and Gaiden made zero sense to be playing an old man Kiryu, as he sounds way too young, actually ends up doing a more fitting voice for the character of young Kiryu. There are of course a few oddities, a few weird bits of direction and some odd casting. It certainly isn't perfect, and it's certainly not the best dub from these games because, well, not every game has Crispin Freeman in it. And of course, the Japanese dub is still incredible, so even though the English dub is very good, it's not a superior replacement for the original. But for what it's supposed to be, which is an optional or alternative way to experience the story of the game in a way that might be preferred by people who don't want to read subtitles or people who don't really understand Japanese and find it hard to understand what's happening even with the subtitles, and those sorts of people can now get something that provides an equally entertaining experience. It's also good for when you look away for like 2 seconds and miss one of the lines, and then you look back and the subtitle's gone, you have no no idea what they just said, because for some reason, Lost Judgment added a conversation log, and then they just went, yeah, let's not make that a standard from now on, RGG Studio. Then there's a completely new thing, which is an optional multiplayer mode that has no ties to the main game. It's its own separate thing you can access from the main menu called Red Light Raid. It's not very expansive, it's not something you can see lasting years and years with support from the developers or anything like that. It's literally just a bonus thing you can stuff around with. Red Light Raid is still pretty cool though, but no one is really talking about it or explaining it, understandably, because I feel like I'm the only YouTuber who actually knows about Yakuza that's played it enough to figure out the intricacies of it, and they're not very interesting. Well, they're interesting enough for me to explain everything I've learned in a big wall of text here. I also have explained it a little bit on streams, in particular the one I did on Red Light Raid, so maybe you've heard some of this spiel before, but I don't want to make the video any longer, so you're free to pause and read it, or just ignore it completely, or whatever. I'm just gonna move on. Now, Red Light Raid, for being their first proper multiplayer mode that isn't just the two-player minigames of most titles, the Ishin online minigames that they did, or the player-made Dondoko Islands, is surprisingly good. There's shockingly little lag and desync, and I know this because I have played with people from America, and normally playing with Americans when you're in Australia, in most other games, you get quite bad lag, to say the least. And despite it being a little repetitive, it is quite a lot of simplistic fun where you just bash people. Playing it with CPUs, it's certainly less fun. Playing it online with randoms, a little more fun, but playing it with people you know does enhance the experience, especially when you do something dumb like play as 4 clowns or 4 Majimas. If you have some friends, especially if you use the Switch 2's little game chat feature thing, it's not a bad way to spend some time with them. There are better ways, but it's still a good one. I hope to see more things like this in the future. I especially think in the turn-based ones, multiplayer modes would work great, or at the very least I hope they include other kinds of little multiplayer options just for a small optional extra bit of fun. If they keep doing stuff like this, I never want them to go beyond this sort of scope, because this works perfectly for the sort of game series that Yakuza is. Simple things like this to expand on a game in the future would be great, especially since in Yakuza 0 Director's Cut, it's only one of 2 things that actually expand on the game. Yes, that's right. Because the other thing that they added is some brand new cutscenes to the game, for whatever reason. Now, they made a special deal about how there were 25 minutes of new cutscenes, but those minutes are only from 5 new cutscenes. I'm hopeful that because it's been long enough now, people have forgotten what the internet told them about these cutscenes, because when the game came out, everyone said that all 5 of these were terrible. None of these 5 were entirely necessary, but they're not all bad. I'll describe what they consist of in the order that they appear in, bearing in mind that the first one appears like 100 hours into the game, so I'll be discussing some spoilery topics for not only Yakuza 0, but every game ever. But everyone knows the story of 0 at this point, right? Anyway, the first cutscene is wedged into the point where Majima goes into this little office. Originally, it's just a loading screen, then you're in the office, but now suddenly a cutscene plays. Now, you can tell which of the cutscenes are the new ones and which are the old ones by a few different things. For one, because the entirety of Yakuza 0 Director's Cut on the Switch 2 is 60 FPS, all of the cutscenes are too, except for these new ones that are 30, which is quite obvious. They're pre-rendered, hence why they're locked to 30, or at least probably, I don't know, maybe they're secretly not. The 2 big things that might be harder to notice for people who are playing for the first time is that the lighting direction is very different. I'm not sure what engine these would have actually been rendered in, whether it was the actual game engine or something else, but the placements of lights, colors, the angles, the whatever are just slightly different enough to notice that it's different, which makes sense because matching a creative approach that you had 10 years ago is a little hard, and I believe this is more on the technical side, but the way the shadows are drawn are quite different as well. But then another hard to notice difference, which is something I really like about all of these cutscenes, is that the facial animations are much better in their subtlety. I don't know how they did facial animations back then, I don't know how they did them here. I just know that the more modern an RGG studio game gets, the better their facial animations become, and so these do look great in that respect. But anyway, new cutscene starts, and to summarize, basically a guy comes up to Majima and says, "Hey, Lee's alive." You know, the guy who got blown up in a van and would have been in a million pieces? Yeah, he's alive, and he's literally right around the corner, but I'm gonna try and pretend like he isn't. Anyway, he says you should look after Makoto. Oh, hey, actually, you know that watch of Makoto's? Yeah, you should totally repair that. Oh, okay, says Matthew Mercer. And then that's the cutscene. Well, it's a cutscene, and I'll come back to it later. The next one is once again just sort of wedged into a separate story trigger, which is when you're in Sotenbori as Kiryu and you're about to head into the band in the UK store to meet up with Oda. In this one, the Toko credit guy who died off screen actually didn't die, which in comparison to the last person who didn't actually die, at least with this one, they have a perfectly justifiable reason. He wasn't very important, died in the same way Hamazaki did in 3, who of course didn't die, or did a thing like a fake Makoto death from 0, where basically someone pretended he died so that he could get away. And that someone was Shibusawa, who did it as part of his secret power play. This guy is also someone who not a single person cares about, so who cares if he's alive? Anyway, the point of this cutscene was to further push the plot point that Shibusawa was secretly pulling some huge strings, which I think the original story did perfectly fine, so that wasn't entirely necessary, but it also was to do actually a cool, again, but not really necessary reference to Peace Finance from Yakuza 1, the dudes Kiryu beats up right at the very start of the game. Which, personally, I think that's cool because it helps to set up Yakuza 1 just a tiny bit more. This cutscene also, rather inappropriately considering the time frame, shows the player a Kiryu that has literally never been seen before. Yakuza Kiryu. He mean mugs the guy who threatens him, he acts all brash and brutal, like a Yakuza. Which he isn't at this point, but this is actually the Kiryu we're always told exists, but never got any evidence that it ever did. Again, it doesn't make sense at this point in the story, but it's such a cool thing to see from Kiryu. It makes me really, really wish we could one day get a game set between 0 and the start of 1 where Kiryu is actually in the Yakuza. But anyway, to summarize that cutscene, it just adds a bit of flavor and doesn't really change the plot. Then the next one plays after the final time you fight Kuze as Kiryu. In the original, you beat Kuze, then he basically spills his guts and tells you what Shibusawa is planning. Then before Kiryu leaves, Kuze basically says to Kiryu, "You're in for a world of shit," and Kiryu says, "You're right, cheers, big dog," and then walks off. So the final time you ever see Kuze in the entire series, he gets a small introductory cutscene, then there's just a dialogue cutscene, then he doesn't get an intro but does get a sick QTE in his boss fight, then there's another dialogue cutscene, and then that's it, and you never hear from him ever again. In Director's Cut, however, they did something that genuinely is amazing, that makes me wonder why the fuck the rest of the scenes weren't just this. You beat Kuze, have a little bit of dialogue, but when Nishiki runs off, boom, new cutscene. And this cutscene is great. Throughout the game, Kuze and Kiryu develop a lot of respect for each other. I don't know if I'm the only one who thinks this, but Kuze is very obviously a Yakuza 5 Kiryu if he had have never left the Yakuza, so their rapport with each other makes sense. And especially in this scene, Kuze warns Kiryu by asking him if he's prepared to walk this dangerous road that Kuze is well aware Kiryu will face, and obviously in a better way than this, pretty much says to him, "Are you prepared to face the trials of Yakuza 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Gaiden, and Infinite Wealth?" And Kiryu says, "I am." And as he walks off, you see a smile on Kuze's face. It's a significantly better send-off for Kuze than the original gave him, and it replaces a dialogue cutscene with something proper, which again, all these new cutscenes should have done. Kuze genuinely is responsible for most of Kiryu's growth in Zero, and so to see the writers recognize that by having one last deep exchange of words between the two is great. And the best part, it doesn't change the story one bit, it just improves it. But then there's the next one, which changes the story a little bit, but in all honesty is actually an expansion on Like a Dragon Gaiden more than anything. It randomly comes in after you've beaten the game, and all it is that Billiken the cop who introduced you to Nishitani is also alive, which again, who cares about this character, but also him surviving is also perfectly reasonable. Like, he got one round from a low power cartridge in his spine. People in real life survive that all the time, but he's in a wheelchair, implying he's probably partially paralyzed, so it's all reasonable at the very least. Billy Cop tells Majima on the phone that basically Nishitani II, a guy who was indirectly mentioned in Gaiden when Nishitani III rocked up out of literally nowhere, is indeed a real guy, and he says that any patriarch of the Kijin clan takes the name of Nishitani. So there you go. It doesn't add anything to Zero's story, and the placement is weird, but whatever. Then there's the last one, which is actually attached to the credits, and you can't replay just this cutscene without replaying the whole credits. Awesome. Thanks. This cutscene is after everything in the original happens and just consists of Nishiki and Kiryu driving around Kamurocho reminiscing on the events of Yakuza 0. This is just a funny cutscene, expanding on the relationship between Kiryu and Nishiki further, which is great, and also expanding on the thoughts and feelings of these two in regards to certain things that happened, like Kiryu abandoning Nishiki in the forest and stealing his car. Oh, and also, because they drive around Kamurocho and they clearly didn't have enough time to make some new roads, Nishiki just literally drives in a circle. Yeah, okay. And that's it for new cutscenes. So what have we got? We got the Kiryu and Kuze one, which is an excellent addition, the Kiryu and Nishiki one, which is hilarious, the Majima and Billy the Kid, as well as Kiryu and Tojo Credit Guy ones, which weren't necessary but were nice, and the first one, which sucked, which is surprising, because I was led to believe that they were all awful and all ruined the story of the game, or at least that's what my echo chamber told me, because I don't like thinking for myself. Alright, but no, seriously, what the fuck was the point of that first cutscene? You see, this led many people to talk about how death means nothing in the Yakuza series. Why? Because it's not the first time a character has been brought back from the dead. No one ever seems to complain when a character comes back within one story, like Majima in 1 and Kiwami sort of, Terada in 2, Hamazaki in 3, Masato in Like a Dragon, or Kiryu in 1, 2, 3, 6, and 8, and the only reason he didn't fake die in 7 was because he was in it for 5 seconds, and he didn't fake die in 4 because Akiyama did instead, but he did fake die in 5, except he came back to life in another game. Anyway, these things are usually very dumb, but you see, the reason no one really complains about these is because the plots of every Yakuza game, admittedly, kinda suck. So in community discussions, everyone just kind of accepts that and never really brings it up. If you like these stories for their plot, you're lying. Especially when there's games like 3 which have a plot so boring that they need an entire chapter just to explain it in an even more boring way. No. People like the stories because of their phenomenal characters and the interactions those characters have and the performances of the actors and essentially the story told by the relationships all the characters share. So that's why, understandably, when a character dies and the plot resolves with them dying, only for them to come back in a future title, it's dumb. Now, for some reason, everyone thinks I'm pro bringing back characters. I'm not, but it seriously is not the catastrophic world-ending problem everyone makes it out to be. At all. You see, there have only been 5 characters who died in one game only to come back in a future game. 6, but Director's Cut is realistically just Yakuza 0 still. And if you skip that one scene, Lee is canonically still dead because they didn't adjust any other scene, which is funny. But these were Kashiwagi and Lau Ka-long, who both died in 3 and came back in 7. Andre Richardson, who died in 3 and came back in 8. Morinaga, who died in 5 and came back in 8. And again, Kiryu, who had an "oh my god, he's dead" in 5, and then came back inevitably with 6. The 3 who died in 3 were of course very ridiculous. Kashiwagi got shredded to pieces by a minigun, Lau Ka-long got shot in the head, Richardson fell a billion stories to his death, but the 2 from 5 were fair. Morinaga dies off screen, so who knows what actually happened to him, and Kiryu's Kiryu, he dies every Tuesday. But every other character who has died are still dead. So naturally, this leads to everyone saying that death means nothing in the Yakuza series, which is true. No, not that no one stays dead, because out of the 100 characters they've killed, there are now 4 that are alive. No, it's instead that death means nothing because all they fucking do is kill people. Yeah, here's the actual problem with retconning deaths. It's that because they kill important characters every 5 milliseconds and because the characters are the only good parts of each game's story, they sort of go, well, fuck, what do we do? Here's an idea, RGG Studio. Stop just killing everyone! Besides funny jokes, which for Richardson and Lau Ka-long, them coming back was obviously just for a laugh, there have been actually good moments thanks to characters returning. Kiryu seeing Kashiwagi in Infinite Wealth is very emotional, Morinaga coming back created an incredible character in Gaiden, and Ryuji being teased as being alive was cool, but he's not, so that's irrelevant to this discussion. You wouldn't get those moments if they never died, of course, but you also wouldn't get a shitload of fuck every game from every second character dying, or worse, just being deleted from the game anyway. Now, there are 2 reasons that characters ever die in the first place. The first is some sort of plot reason. Prime example, Dojima and Sera in Yakuza 1. Their deaths kicked off the events of the game and were an interesting way to get the high stakes ball rolling. Then there's the other reason, which is just for shock value or to generate some tears. Again, talking about 3, a prime example is of course Rikia. His death served no actual plot purposes. He wasn't killed by Black Monday or Mine or something. He didn't have some knowledge he was about to share. He wasn't about to go do something important. He just got killed by the Orange Man who died 5 seconds later because it was meant to be a tearjerker, which it successfully was. You're given plenty of reason to care about him, even including him in sub-stories and little optional things to do with him, so him dying is of course very sad. But an example of a shocking death that actually also serves a plot purpose, which is obscenely rare, was Lee's. Sagawa didn't like where the whole Makoto thing was going and had to end Lee, which shocks the player and forces Majima to change plans. In terms of the 5 other characters who were brought back in future titles, they all had purposeful deaths. Hence why it was so dumb that they're back. But for God's sake, the amount of deaths that serve no purpose and just exist to be shocking is so annoying. Why do they do it? Well, it's because they introduce like 100 characters per game, and fortunately it doesn't happen in the recent games, but far out, man. For a long time, if you were a character from Yakuza 2, 3, 4, or 5, and you're not from Yakuza 1, Daigo, Akiyama, and especially if you're not Saejima, you're not coming back. You'll die, or just be deleted. You can have throwaway deaths if there's some random dude who's been in a game for 2 seconds, who cares if he dies? If it's a villain, you can just kill a villain, whatever. A lot of the time killing them or sending them to jail for eternity just makes the most sense. But Sayama, the Ryudo family, plus Saki, Kido, Hana barely made it back, Watase got lucky, Nakajima, Baba, I mean really everyone from Yakuza 5 got wiped. They didn't even die, and yet they're treated more like they died than the people that died. But the biggest examples of this nonsense of getting rid of characters without even pointlessly killing them is Tanimura and Shinada. I mean, are you serious? Shinada didn't even get a mention until the 8th one. Everyone loves Mac from Yakuza 3, but he seriously has triple the appearances of 2 protagonists? It's just ridiculous. I mean, if you go from 6 to Judgment or Like a Dragon and the protagonist completely swaps, then yeah, that's okay to delete characters. But in a consistent world, with a consistent protagonist across, like, all of them, somehow it has the most inconsistent cast of characters imaginable. That's why Infinite Wealth was great, because characters that had weight in the story stayed. But even in saying that, they're getting better at bringing back characters that make sense to stay, but they're still doing pointless deaths. Wong To reveals all the information he knows and he's injured in the forest, now hunted down by Pelicana. Does he die before he's about to reveal something? Does he die because he's now actively helping Ichiban stop Pelicana? No. He's chilling in a house because his leg's fucked, and then he just dies. And at the same time, Hanawa, who doesn't really do much in Infinite Wealth, also dies. And by the way, to the countless people who somehow couldn't figure it out, Hanawa is Morinaga. It's very obvious if you pay attention. So even a character who comes back from the dead just gets pointlessly killed. You don't need to kill people to make a story sad or interesting. Look at Gaiden, where literally no one dies in the whole story, and it's the saddest story ever. You also don't have to keep characters, but at least give a logical reason to kick them out. Kuze and Shibusawa never returning makes perfect sense. They're probably now both chilling in Hawaii enjoying retirement. But then there's Sayama. I've always thought that Ryuji should never have died. I mean, especially since he gets a million bullet holes and then is fine to fight Kiryu at full strength and then loses and the bomb doesn't go off, but somehow he dies, so Kiryu fucking killed him. But anyway, if they wanted to kick out Sayama in 3, they could have just said that she's going back to Osaka to look after Ryuji because he's in bad shape in hospital, and she's going to use it as a chance to continue her work and to get to know her brother. Sad to see you go, but that's very reasonable. And then in Gaiden, when fake Ryuji shows up, it could have been real Ryuji, and it would have been a cool fight. It starts getting to the point where I don't even give a fuck about them bringing characters back, because I'm sick of everyone that isn't Kiryu bloody dying all the time because they trip on their shoelaces and fall face first into a bomb. But anyway, the actual most prominent problem with these new cutscenes in Director's Cut is that it is only one of 2 new things to Director's Cut. I love saving anywhere, Red Light Raid is pretty fun, and some of the cutscenes are good, but they may as well have just called it the Yakuza 0 Switch 2 port, like with Kiwami 1 and now 2. Especially since if this thing comes to other platforms and likely replaces the original version of Yakuza 0, people who don't own the game will likely have to pay an increased price to what they would have for the same game. And I'll tell you right now, last year I got SMT5 Vengeance, Metaphor Refantasio, and Space Marine 2 for free. The 2 Atlas games were YouTube related, hell yeah. And Space Marine I got with a deal for my CPU. I love the hell out of all 3 of those games, and I still would have loved them if I bought them, but every now and then when I played them, I would stop and think, I'm having this much fun, and I paid nothing for this? And automatically, I would have significantly more fun. And so playing through Yakuza 0 again with Director's Cut, I kept getting frustrated with things I didn't like about the original all over again, as well as new things. And the whole time, the thought kept biting at me in the back of my head that I had to pay $90 Australian for something that I already own. It's not justifiable to call this a new game. Maybe you could have called it a new game if you did more shit though. I mean, personally, I can't believe they didn't think to do more quality of life tweaks. Big thing I can think of is something that I can't believe they never did originally, but how was there not a fast travel point that takes you directly to the character's respective business minigame, or at the very least right outside them? With the way the old inventory system works too, I don't know why you can't just deposit items into your item box whenever you want. It'd be useful when you're doing stuff like the UFO catcher and want to put items away in your storage, and it'll also make it so that you can go to a store with no space in your inventory, put something away without having to consume or discard it, and browse the store. Or, you know, they could have made it that you can still look at stuff if your inventory is full. Whatever. Another thing too is, as much as I would have preferred them to not lock anything to do with your abilities or the fourth styles behind those business minigames, at the very least they could have made it so that you clear all locks the first time one of the locks are cleared or something. And I would have also absolutely loved if they made some big combat changes, of course, like removing the gear mechanic because I hate it, but all they actually needed were more small things like saving anywhere. Things that don't change the experience, they just improve it. Even something as small as that could have justified calling it Director's Cut just a little more. And something else I would have liked, but it wasn't completely necessary, is that 2.5 years ago in the Ishin remake, they shifted around a bunch of songs from the original. This is because there are a lot of boss fights that would have repeated themes, although there was one that had a unique theme that they changed for no reason, but whatever. These songs were a few new remixes of old themes, but also just some themes from all the games. They didn't need to make new remixes, but Tusk and Misery Comes on Beat play every 3 seconds, and for all the fights Kiryu gets involved in, they all make sense, but there's a handful of Majima fights that I thought would have been cool if they chucked in some different songs, just for a bit of fun, and so then I don't have to hear Misery Comes on Beat every 3 seconds. And I can't be bothered explaining my thought process with these, so hopefully they make sense, but yeah, they should have done this. But you know what would have been better than new cutscenes? New cutscenes. And also new gameplay. Something like an additional story saga like in Kiwami 2. But I mean, it makes sense, right? Certainly would make more sense than random cutscenes that don't really do anything. If they were to do something like this, I think it would make a lot of sense to do something that happens after the end of Zero. I mean, like with Xenoblade Definitive Edition on the Switch, which I'm sure I'll be told there were better examples than that. But if you've already beaten the game, or after you've beaten the game, or if you don't care about the main story, you can do this little extra thing that then connects it to Kiwami, which is of course also on the Switch and is now getting a Switch 2 upgrade. And it'd be called something like the Nishiki Saga. I've discussed an idea I had before in this video from a while ago about an extra saga where you play as Nishiki and it ends with him shooting Dojima at the start of Yakuza 1. But since then, I feel like they could do something a bit bigger than that massively expands on the story of both 0 and 1. Because what would have been nice is if 0 launched on the Switch 2 and then later in the year, a Nishiki Gaiden comes out alongside a Switch 2 update for Kiwami, especially since once you beat 0 on the Switch, you don't have to worry about getting spoiled for Kiwami because they actually cut out the plot summary of Yakuza 1 from the credits in this version. So what this spin-off would be is a game where you, obviously, play as Nishiki. It'd be set sometime after 0 happens and it tells the story of Kiryu's rise to being a legend. But would you play as Kiryu? No, because it's actually a story of Nishiki living in Kiryu's shadow and everything that happens as a result of that. Considering this series has managed to cover nearly every year between 2005 and 2025, it's surprising to me that there's still such a large point in time where nothing is ever shown, even though a lot of things very obviously happened. I mean, Kiryu didn't just magically go from that guy who's now a civilian who is a massive pain in the ass and everyone wants to kill him, to the guy that makes every thug in Tokyo shit their pants. So this game would take place over multiple years, and I think it'd be cool if each chapter was named after the year that the chapter is set in. Doing this has potential for a lot of really interesting story beats. Nishiki could come across Majima and maybe see the first canonical instance of crazy Majima. You could see Shinji joining the Yakuza, you can meet Shindo, you could see Nishiki and Kiryu getting their tattoos filled in, they could actually fucking put Yumi in the game. But the biggest thing is that they could actually include Nishiki's sister and have her be an important character in the game. I mean, she is literally so unimportant that the Amazon show, which so far has been the only thing that thought to make her a character, unfortunately they made her a good one, she doesn't even have the same name as what she had in the games. And something that Amazon show did was make Yuko so likable that when she died, you could actually understand what Nishiki was going through, because even though Kiwami did such a great job at expanding on Nishiki's story, I still don't give a shit that she's dead, because I never bloody met her. And also, I think what would be great about a game like this is that it'd tell a significantly better version of Yakuza 1's story. 100% because it'd cut out all the useless shit like Lau Ka Long. Fuck Lau Ka Long, I hate him. In terms of gameplay, Nishiki of course has his own fighting style already, and whether or not they could do multiple, I don't know. I mean, personally it'd be cool to see fighting styles that mimic Kiryu's and or Kashiwagi's, but really it'd depend on the size of the game. But some fights that they'd have to do would be a fight against some Dojima goons that would lead to Nishiki shooting him, and of course, for the first time in an action game since 5, a Kiryu boss fight. They could have a boss fight maybe towards the start of just some sparring between Kiryu and Nishiki, or the better option would be to make Kiryu the final boss of the game. That way they can make Kiryu the main antagonist, even though he's still the hero of the story. Now, I'm going to aid you in imagining what I'm about to describe, but I have no ability at all to draw or animate or anything like that, and I'm too nervous to place orders at restaurants half the time, so no way in hell am I capable of asking people to help me. So enjoy whatever the hell I can mush together in Photoshop with my incredibly limited skills, and in Premiere with my slightly less limited skills. Alright, imagine this. The second last chapter ends with Nishiki shooting Dojima in the head. Then the final chapter starts and it says, 2005. Because a large part of Nishiki's story was covered in Yakuza 1 and Kiwami 1, I think what would be good is the chapter opening with a Nishiki who sounds like he's tired, to say the least. Defeated, lost, hopeless, whatever you want to call it. It's a dark and stormy night, and Nishiki's in an office all on his own, and he's recounting events that happened in Yakuza 1. You know, I did this, I did that, this happened, that happened. He goes down the list of things, and as he proceeds, he starts to get more and more upset by what he's saying. He slowly shifts from saying what he's done, and instead saying what he wish he did. He starts to bring up his regrets and his broken hopes and dreams. He brings up Kiryu, he brings up Yumi, he brings up Reina, and he brings up all the horrible things he's done to people who have done nothing wrong. And Nishiki, on the verge of tears, just asks something along the lines of, "Why did you have to die, Yuko?" And then the camera cuts to reveal he's been saying all this to the little memorial thing to Yuko. For a moment, you hear nothing but the sounds of the rain and thunder, and Nishiki struggling to regain his composure. He takes a deep breath. But I can't turn back the clock now, because that's said in Yakuza 1. You see, nice little reference there. And Nishiki stands up, sees his own reflection in the window, and then they wouldn't have to do this, but do like a Metal Gear Solid 5 thing where there's lightning that flashes and Nishiki's reflection is covered in blood, and then he walks out the door. The final chapter starts now, and I don't know what had happened or where it'd be set, because again, this is all just hypothetical. But where I think would be good to begin the conclusion of the final chapter is at, of course, the Millennium Tower. Scattered on the floor are a bunch of knocked out CIA dudes, or MIA, I don't know the difference. And Nishiki arrives just in time for there to be a shitload of Tojo clan reinforcements. I mean, word's got out, the 10 billion yen is up there, and each family is racing to be the ones to retrieve it. But of course, they're in your way. A long battle ensues with Nishiki beating the ever-loving shit out of all these Tojo dudes, which prevents them from getting to the top of the tower, hence why they're not there in Yakuza 1, you see. Clever little additional plot point that doesn't change the plot of the original there. You clear through the enemies and get up to that elevator, and then boom, the final boss of Yakuza 1, but from the other side. You know how cool it is when a game makes the final boss a previous protagonist? You know how much cooler it would be if it's the main protagonist of almost all the games ever since the first one? You know how cool that would be as a huge homage to where the series began 20 years ago? 20 years ago, that battle we fought, that soul we tried to save, that's us now. Well, not me, because 20 years ago I couldn't even read yet, but maybe we can change fate. Well, no, because I think the fight would be most appropriate if when you beat Kiryu, it plays a final QTE where you have to mash the button, and no matter how much you mash it, you always fail, and the fight ends with Nishiki defeated. The cutscene after the fight would roughly play out as it does in the original, but with Nishiki barely conscious, replaying memories in his head, memories of better times, happy memories, before suddenly, a gunshot snaps him awake. He struggles to stand, he grabs a knife, and then proceeds as usual. Nishiki pulls the trigger, and suddenly, darkness. Again, just like the original, but the darkness doesn't fade. It doesn't cut to the comical explosion in the Millennium Tower I like to use as punchlines in videos. It's just darkness. Silent, empty, cold, terrifying. But suddenly, there's a voice. Two, in fact. The voices of two young girls calling Nishiki's name. Nishiki, Nishiki, wake up! Come on, Nishiki, get up! Huh? Nishiki says. Suddenly the two voices come into frame. Yumi? Yuko? They reach their tiny little hands forward and Nishiki reaches out with his, and you can see Nishiki's hands are of course the hands of an adult, but then they pull him up and the camera cuts and suddenly there's a small child where Nishiki was. Come on Nishiki, let's go, the girls say to this boy. They start to run off as obviously a young Nishiki stands up. Wait, hold on. Where's Kiryu?
Kazuma?
Oh, he's over there. Nishiki looks to his left and suddenly he sees the hallway of a hospital. It's also dark, it's also empty, but at the end of the hall is an open door. Nishiki walks up to the sign next to the door. Kazuma Kiryu. He walks in and he sees a lot of people in there, all gathered around this one spot. He doesn't recognize them, but they all seem to be upset. Sad. He's short, so he can't really see over and look at what they're all gathered around. But then...
Nishiki!